Hello everybody and welcome to or back to my channel, and welcome to the first part of a new series we're doing on the channel where we cover, review, and rank the Hannibal Lecter book series, written by Thomas Harris. In today's video, we're going to be covering the first book of the series, Red Dragon, which is the first appearance of Dr. Hannibal Lecter in any form of media. So if you're down for that, let's get started. The book opens with Will Graham and Jack Crawford discussing a new psychopath that has since victimized 2 families. It had been all over the news, there was 60 confessions, but none of them knew some very vital details, such as the fact that the killer smashes the windows and uses the pieces. The killer is also blonde, right-handed, a strong guy who wears size 11 shoes. He's also AB positive, which they found based among some other less appropriate bodily fluids. Crawford and Will then discussed why exactly Will didn't call Crawford after hearing about the second murder. The first could be happenstance or a crime of passion, but the second confirmed it was in fact a psychopath who would do this again. And we all know Will can get fully immersed in the mindset of these kinds of criminals. Will tells Crawford it's because he truly put all of this behind him. He'd moved on. His ability to make those insane jumps with the way his mind worked despite very little evidence he had wasn't needed. Will told Jack that he truly had everyone he needed to work on this already. It's at this point where Crawford tells us a little bit more about the killer. He's seemingly killing in tandem with the moon. He killed one of the families on the night of a full moon, and the other one day short of a lunar month. So they have about 3 weeks to catch the guy before he hits again. Shortly after this conversation, Jack had left and Will was now talking with his wife Molly. They were discussing Jack and Will's work in the field and what it would kind of mean if he went back, or if he'd even want to. They make a quick note to mention Will's scar as Will and Molly discuss Will's past cases dealing with these kind of monsters, and how the final time he'd been in the field like this, Hannibal Lecter gave Will a finger-width size huge scar with a linoleum knife. As Will and Molly are discussing this, she obviously really doesn't want him to go back, but there's something in him that's pulling him back towards it. He even gives her little excuses such as, "I'll be in the back, the monster would never even know my name or what I look like," and the chapter eventually culminates with Will officially getting back involved. Following this, Will is now at the Leeds' house, and he does his best to figure out what exactly happened to the family that was killed. The father and children were killed differently than Mrs. Leeds. There was something different about her. The others hadn't been disfigured so horribly. Horrific biting, and as I said, disfigurement. Will would continue looking around, and before he left he saw a little doghouse. The Leeds family were surprised in their sleep, so Will made a note to ask Crawford what happened to the dog. That night, as Will lay in bed, he had a classic eureka moment and thought about the dimensions and positions of everyone and the way the bodies had been arranged, and the positions of the bloodstains. The madman positioned the kids and the dad in a way so that he could have an audience while he put on his disgusting performance of Mrs. Leeds. Will continued to think about this, how the madman used rubber gloves to conceal his fingerprints, and how the traces of talcum being found indicate he at some point removed the gloves as he touched Mrs. Leeds, putting them back on so that he could wipe her down afterwards. But if he wanted the children's corpses to watch, had he opened their eyes? And if he had, was he wearing the gloves while he did it? This thought caused Will to call Crawford and tell him to get down to Atlanta. The scene now shifts. Following this, Will and Crawford were discussing the crimes and the evidence and leads with the local police department, and they began discussing one of the very few leads they had, which was the biting. How the first family that was massacred, the woman victim had 8 horrific bite marks, and Mrs. Leeds had 6 horrific bite marks. Now they were able to figure out what the killer's teeth looked like after matching his saliva from the bite marks on the women to the saliva of a bite taken out of some cheese in one of the victims' houses. They didn't have much to go on, so what they could do was talk to child welfare people, emergency service people, and kind of just look around for criminals with a tendency for biting. The officers around the department began referring to the killer as the Tooth Fairy. Following this, we get a bit more information on both the dog and the fingerprint. According to the police commissioner, the Leeds dog had been taken to the vet with some sort of puncture wound, likely inflicted with an ice pick or something similar, the afternoon before they were killed. Will asked about the prior family and if they had a dog. That ended up being a no. Now onto the fingerprint. Crawford's fingerprint guy called him and told him he managed to snag a partial, but it would be very hard to work with. Now following this, Will once again found himself in the Leeds house, watching an old home movie and really taking in the space, trying to take in all the information about them he could get while they were still alive. It was actually a very sad part of the book. Now back at the hotel that night, Will and Molly were on the phone being half freaky and half serious, and I honestly do really like their relationship. She understands him and his job, and while she hates that he's back in the field and she does want him back, she just gets it and wants him to stay safe. Now sometime later we would get a bit more information regarding the missing cat from earlier at the Jacoby's house, the Jacobys being the first family. It turns out the missing cat's body had been found in a shoebox with a flower between its paws. The book only briefly goes over this among a stack of other reports and documents. Will and Springfield, the commissioner, go to Mr. Parsons' house to ask him about a suspicious man who read his meter. Mr. Parsons explained that whoever it was looked as normal as a meter reader should. Mr. Parsons was going to speak to the man. By the time he went outside, the man was already gone. However, as Will and Springfield spoke to the man a little more, they were able to get at least a couple more helpful bits of information. Once again, he was blonde, and at most eye level with the meter. Springfield called for the sketch artist to make a house call to Mr. Parsons, and once he'd be done with that, they'd go door to door asking if anyone had seen the man. But this painted a bit more of a picture of what the killer's process is. Case the place by pretending to do something else, something like checking a meter, kill the house pet, and then kill the family. It was following this that Springfield and Will started talking about dear old Hannibal the cannibal. More specifically, how Will figured out it was him, and what exactly Will thought Hannibal was. What would be his diagnosis? The way one of the victims was killed matched some sort of medical book in Hannibal's waiting room, and he just knew. Hannibal's 9-kill murder spree came to an end, and Will gave kind of a half-assed answer when it came to the diagnosis, saying some people would say he's a sociopath. Now back to the task at hand, local PD and the FBI had a 3-day head start to catch this guy before vital information about the killer's pattern would be released to the media. Nothing truly came of that canvas, however, and Will knew what he needed to do. From the first moment Will and Hannibal begin their conversation, it's immediately clear that Hannibal was trying to pick and prod subtly with a little bit of that, you know that I know, I'm trying to mess with you, and intrude on that little brain of yours, and eventually Will handed off the file so that Hannibal could see what he'd make of it, and this is what he said. He asked Will if perhaps the Tooth Fairy himself was disfigured. The glass shards were positioned in a way that he may be able to see himself in them. Will admitted the thought had crossed his mind, however Lecter's second idea was far more interesting. We know the killer kills in tandem with the habits of the moon, so he would like to see it, wouldn't he? So maybe there was more at play in regards to the backyard than previously thought. The conversation ended with Hannibal asking Will why did he really think he caught him, because they were exactly alike. Will had left the building by this point, and Hannibal tricked the guards and such into giving him access to a telephone to call his lawyer. However, he used it to figure out a personal phone number connected to Will, where he thought he may one day surprise him with a phone call or send him a colostomy bag for old time's sake. Now, sometime later, and we meet someone very, very important, Francis Dolarhyde, who works at a film processing plant and overall seems like a guy down on his luck. He's insecure about a speech impediment, people are making fun of him, and nobody appreciates or cares about little old Francis. Back at home now, Francis lived alone, and he did his usual household routine until he was back in his room, and there it was, a print of William Blake's The Great Red Dragon, and in Francis's mind, there had never been anything that approached his graphic thought. The similarity to his own mind was so severe he feared he would have his own thoughts spilling out of his ears, which caused him to start making makeshift earplugs out of various materials. This dude was crazy, and it would get far worse, because he was now popping a chub, and he decided to set up a projector, and he began watching a video of him whacking his shit in front of the red dragon picture before getting closer to the camera, showing off his fucked up lips and teeth, and the shot would now change to the Leeds family as he committed the horrible atrocities. Francis was in fact the Tooth Fairy, or the Red Dragon. Now, the following chapter mainly focused on Will going to the Jacoby house and retracing the steps he believed the killer would have taken throughout the trees. Will was able to figure out that the Tooth Fairy likely hid among the trees and watched as the kids discovered the animal, never leaving the area. It was among the trees that Will discovered a soft drink can, which may be useful later, as well as a strange symbol carved into a tree. We shift perspective to Dolarhyde now, as he read a story that a journalist had written after snapping secret shots of Will leaving the hospital after visiting Hannibal. This was blasted all over, famed FBI investigator using the help from a former catch. We also find out a little bit more about Will, and the fact that he himself had been admitted to a mental institution. This caused some questions if he should be spearheading this investigation to begin with. The Dolarhyde perspective ends with him sending a letter to Hannibal. We move now back to the investigation. All they were able to get from the soft drink can was a small print of the edge of a nose. However, the carving was more interesting. The symbol turned out to be a Chinese character, which meant you hit it on the head. Now pause for just a second, because I have to be so completely honest. The next line of the book completely confused me, because the Asian scholar that had told him all of this brings up that this character appears on a mahjong piece which was marked the Red Dragon. However, I just don't remember them ever bringing up a mahjong piece, and I feel extremely stupid. I even consulted Google and ChatGPT as a last resort just to ask, and nobody had an answer for when the piece was first referenced, but it seems like pretty important information to mention regardless. Let's continue. So a little later now, when Chilton, who's in charge of the place in Chesapeake where Lecter is being held, calls up Crawford to tell him about the note they found in Hannibal's cell. There's a part torn out, which is likely how the dragon told Lecter how to respond in a way that they could correspond safely, which we figure out to be through personal ads in the Tattler. Now Crawford and the FBI eventually figure this out and are trying to figure out a way to snatch the Tooth Fairy up with a mail drop ambush, which even they say the Tooth Fairy would have to be an idiot to fall for. Now the issue arises when it turns out Lecter had already sent in an ad with a code that the feds won't have enough time to crack before the next Tattler releases, so they just have to let Lecter's ad run to give them more time to figure out what to say. Now the problem is the FBI were able to crack the code, which ended up being Lecter sending the Tooth Fairy Will's home address. Crawford and everyone got Will's family to safety where they were, far away from Florida. Will was pissed and it wasn't going to get any better, because now the Tooth Fairy was calling. He wanted to speak to Will. It was a tense phone call. Will was mostly trying to stall for time so that the phone call could be traced. Eventually it was, and cops could be heard across the line. Sad to say, this wasn't in fact the real Tooth Fairy. It was the good-for-nothing reporter who snapped the pictures of Will leaving Hannibal's cell. He was trying to bait out information while claiming he had some of his own. This made Will furious. He slammed the phone down and Crawford took over. That conversation ended with Crawford and the Tattler striking a mutually helpful deal, and Will was reluctantly on board. However, there would be one tremendous problem. The reporter was kidnapped by the Tooth Fairy, who for the remainder of this video, I'll be calling the Red Dragon. The dragon was not pleased with the news coverage he'd been receiving, being, for lack of a better term, rage-baited by Will and the FBI through the Tattler. And he made the reporter look at him, the stuff he'd been doing to the families, and the dragon print. And before he sends him off alive, because he wants truth in the media rather than these extremely true lies that he's a perverted monster, blah blah blah, he then bites the reporter's lips off as the dragon brings the reporter to set him loose, as the reporter drenched him in gasoline and pushed him out of the car on a chair, setting him on fire. By the time Will made it to the hospital, the reporter died within seconds of Will beginning to speak with him. They weren't able to get much from the license plate, but they were able to figure out that at least the chair had traces of wool from a rug that was likely from a house. So they managed to put a place to the torture of the reporter. Following this, we learned a bit more about the dragon's traumatic backstory that involves abuse, child abandonment, and tremendous violent bullying. We flash back to present day and we figure out how the dragon chooses his victims. As we know, he works at the film reel plant. We took a couple of the home movies to audition the families. The Shermans was the family he had chosen.
Following this is a very interesting segment, because somehow the dragon finds himself a fuck buddy while trying to procure some new kill gear, and this was scary for him. This girl and how he was beginning to feel for her scared him, and as Will slowly closed in on the fact that the Jacobys had a projector and what exactly that could mean for the case, the dragon was doing his best to not kill his new girlfriend.
Will watched the home movies, the same ones that the dragon watched, and realized everything the dragon would have needed to know about the family, the house, the locks, the deadbolts, the animals. It was all in these videos, non-publicly accessible videos, and these home movies all led right back to where the dragon worked. Will and the FBI were so close now, and now apparently the dragon all the way out in New York ate the original Red Dragon painting and assaulted a few similar looking women, but didn't kill them. One of Crawford's guys said that maybe he was trying to stop. But back at home, the dragon was feeling more delusional than ever, feeling like the dragon was really with him, in his belly. However, he overestimates himself. He narrowly misses an encounter with Will back at work. He goes to find his girlfriend and shoots the man who brought her home. He knocks her out and brings her to his house. The FBI have made up a list, found out who was taken, and they knew who the dragon was. However, there was a wrench thrown into these plans, because the dragon can't bring himself to kill Reba, his girlfriend. He just can't. But as he sets his house on fire, the dragon was dead. The nightmare was over. Back in Florida now, Will and Molly's marriage was on the rocks. They tried hard, but it wasn't the same. During a fishing trip, which was silent and uncomfortable, Molly went to make some food and came back telling Will that Crawford had called him. As he went to take the call, he noticed something odd, and bang, plot twist. The dragon lives. They scuffled and the dragon brutally disfigured Will's face as they fought. Will was fucked up, but Molly hit the dragon, which set him on her. She had some distance on him and she ran to the house, got Will's gun, and blew the dragon's face off as he busted through the door. The end of the dragon for good this time. By the time Will woke up in the hospital and had the whole scenario explained to him, how the dragon faked his death by having a dead body on hand, Will's life as he knew it fell apart. That was the end of the book. Now this was a great read, one of my personal favorites of all time. I thoroughly enjoyed this book and its fantastic introduction to these characters. As you guys can tell, there really wasn't much Hannibal in this book at all, and honestly I'm okay with that. Will is such a strong, compelling protagonist. This whole book was a slow burn detective thriller that ends tragically for almost everyone involved. Reba, the dragon's girlfriend, will be forever traumatized from this. Multiple murders, Will gets grotesquely disfigured, Molly and Will's relationship fall apart, Jack no longer has that ace up his sleeve. Honestly, Hannibal is the only one who gained anything from this, by giving Will a huge kick to the dick and ruining his life. It was all done and written super well. I think had the ending actually been the dragon offing himself in his house, that might have worked a little smoother, but I'm not mad at the ending at all. Honestly, there's not too much more to say. It was a great story with very strong characters that, despite not having an abundance of background given to many of them, still felt fleshed out and natural. Tom Harris did a tremendous job with these characters. Very strong first entry into the series, 8.5 out of 10. Once again, if you liked this video, go check out my complete 8-part series where I went over the entire Dexter book series. Thank you once again for watching, and goodbye.